Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host today, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and a tiny disaster. We are back. It feels like it was like 6 months ago last time we did this. I have aged so much in the last week, I think. I think I'm at least 25 years older now. How's everybody doing?
You're like a good. Yeah, I was away for a little bit. You're like a term not you're not like terminally online, but you're online a lot. And the last week you have been sort of offline most of the time, I'd say. So yeah, it was different times for us, and yeah, it doesn't feel like it's been only a week off, has it?
No, feels like it's been quite a while, and I got to see my parents for the first time in 3 years, which was nice, but it just kind of again throws all your normalcy, your normality, your normalness out of the window, and you're like,
Yeah. I mean, it's nice, but it's definitely not the status quo, and that definitely I know at 37 that gets you really tired. I was at a wedding this last week, and we had to drive a bunch, like basically 18 hours between 5 days, and it was hard to have energy for anything. Like, it was just really hard to like summon the energy, and sleeping was kind of wishy-washy on the road. So, tiny disaster, how you been? How's the last couple weeks for you?
Nothing super interesting to report.
Just chilling. Nice.
Getting into summer chaos.
That's true. My kids just ended school, so now they're sitting out in the other room, getting a few days to kind of just waste before we get them into camps and other things of that sort, and make them productive.
Yeah.
You got to waste a few summer days, as far as I'm concerned. Not waste,
summer days. What are you talking about?
Just
the whole point of summer.
But like, if my 6-year-old had his way, he would write out a bunch of YouTube channels and never even go outside, which is crazy because he loves going outside and it's really nice and stuff. So it's just a thing where it's like, let's have some balance here, kid. You could stay inside and play games when you're older, like Cup and Bumpy and such. So it'll be all right. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about kind of not an impromptu topic. It's just something that has been just in the flow of what's been happening recently. Best practices with Steam Next Fest, which one is active right now. Virtual events like Directs, like Nintendo Direct, but also a lot of smaller outfits. Well, I wouldn't say smaller, but just not as big as Nintendo, are identifying their presentations, their showcases with games as Directs.
That would be smaller.
And yeah, and we'll talk about kind of sort of the whole process of locating how to understand where to locate these events for consideration by your team or by yourself, how to submit for them, understanding if you have you're meeting the right criteria to submit for them, or if it's not really a good match or it doesn't make sense to. What to do if you do get accepted into them, of course, and what to do if you're not involved with anything. Like this last week was super busy. Bumpy's probably looking at it going, if I want to get involved with a lot of these demos and stuff, I got a lot of not catching up to do, but there's a list, especially with Next Fest now.
I say usually I'm too busy doing other things to actually ever get to experience that.
I say you're not much of a demo person in general, so like there are some demo fiends out there, and that's like kind of going crazy between both the last week, the myriad of events that took place, basically the non-E3 E3 events, so to speak. E3, of course, was not. I shouldn't say of course, but if you don't know, E3 was not on this year like it has been, I think, the last consecutive years for however many, even during the pandemic, I believe. Maybe not. I can't remember. But this was the first year where they, thought, okay, there's definitely going to be an E3, and then they canceled it. And so that's normally where you get major presentations from at least Sony and Microsoft, and occasionally Nintendo as well, although Nintendo has more or less stepped away from that kind of stuff and is more or less doing their own thing with Directs and such. Yeah. So that's something that went on last week, is huge announcements from both Sony and Microsoft's side. A lot of people lauding what Microsoft brought to the table. Again, a very consumer-friendly approach for them. From the developer publisher side, maybe a little bit more of a, they're really changing the game, and so hold on to dear life kind of thing. but they rolled out a bunch of new, properties saying what we're bringing on Game Pass, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that they did virtually now, as opposed to being at E3 and doing like a full on kind of conference where they are an audience, full audience and people listening and cheering and going crazy, to where it says "Go Crazy" on a sign or somewhere, because it is kind of it feels a little inauthentic at times. But sometimes they knock it out of the park. Sometimes Sony and Microsoft have great shows. So anyway, that's the kind of the basis of all this. And from that, other kind of outfits, organizations, event planners, and such have looked to get involved as well with their own events. Some of them are backed by some quite notable sponsors and individuals, people or organizations like Steam, IGN, Twitch, etc., and like getting their backing, not in just like oh yeah, you can exist on our platforms, but we'll give you features, we'll give you front page, and we'll give you kind of just full access and exposure to our audiences. So that's something that's been happening over the last week. For those who haven't maybe been online or haven't really been involved in like the social side, or who folks who follow those games, it's been rampant. I've seen from my own circle of acquaintances of developer studios that I know, dozens and dozens and dozens of announcements related to new games, games that have already been announced with updates. In our case, Bumpy and I were working on the Cookstore Forever character trailer for Chef Rhubarb, which was just released for a specific summer game event called the Future of Play. So we can talk about that a little bit as well. So lots to talk about here. We can kind of just go through it procedurally, piece by piece, how it makes sense to. Initial thoughts or feedback. Bumpy, I know that you were not eyes on a lot this last week. What did you guys feel like in the last week, or is the beginning of June a thing for you at all? In an annual sense, is that something that you connect with, or is that something that you're not really, this is something that's sort of like, oh, I didn't really know about this.
Yeah, I usually just kind of get the cliff notes. It's like, oh, okay, that was interesting. I don't really care. I know a lot of people are.
I gotta imagine your inbox, kind of gluts up in June, right? Like, yeah.
I remember. I think it was yesterday. Yesterday, the day before, just from promotions. It wasn't even the quote unquote inbox. I had 38 emails. I was like, oh my god. That's more than normal. Just overnight, basically.
That's right. On the promotion side, because Gmail has 3 tabs at this point. For those who don't use Gmail, inbox, social, and promotions. Yep. Social basically useless, but yeah, promotions.
Except for YouTube, I get to see my.
I was gonna say, there might be something, but for just the things that I'm plugged into, like Twitter and stuff, it's just so useless. So yeah, Tiny Disaster, obviously you have been sort of industry adjacent for a while, so this is something that maybe is E3 anything to you?
E3 was something to me, like it was something I looked forward to for a long time, and that was kind of like I watched all of the just kind of bigger promotions on here's what's coming, and then as it started to taper off, I was also kind of losing interest of just so many of the things were years out, or like a lot of these events to me became more of a I'm not going to get excited till there's like a hard release date, and even then, like with games, it's always so kind of tenuous, and there's so many games coming out and so many games to play. For me, it's hard to look too far into the future for things to get excited about. But when they get here, that's great. But for now, there's other things to play.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really common sentiment. There's been a sort of a justifiable jadedness or jaded attitudes towards these shows that have oftentimes been sort of meh. The delivery has been sort of wishy-washy. Sometimes you get great things out of it. Obviously, if you're tied to a franchise or an IP that you're really just in love with, and they're announcing something at these events, then that's something that's going to cue you into them, I think, a little bit more. But I think overall, it's not something. It was something that was like more excitable in maybe more trendy or as a fad years past, and that's something that we've talked about with a lot of public shows, right? That there are like the onus is on them to actually encourage people to participate and show up and have fun, because honestly, they think that a lot of them just think that just them existing is good enough, and they don't really put a lot of effort beyond, creating a viable space, I guess, so to speak, for it. And there's more to it than that. We've talked about that, but that's a different past video. So
Yeah, for me, the way I tend to do stuff, like, I guess I would enjoy like these shows and stuff more, but I basically want to know something's coming out if it's something that I'm already familiar with. Like, say I do Fire Emblem game, for instance, and be like, oh, cool, goes on my list. I want to know when it's going to release, but I really don't want to know anything else about stuff. I like that. All right, guys, we're playing this for the first time. I don't know what I'm getting myself into. I just know I'm going to enjoy it. I try to find stuff that I'm going to be interested in, and then I play those things. And that way I don't really get any spoilers or anything else, where people are like combing over all of the trailers and looking at everything, playing the demo all the way through. I don't want any of that stuff. So for me, it's a very different way of looking at things. And oftentimes when I watch stuff, like occasionally I'll watch like wrestling, I tend to skip 90% of it, watch the matches. I don't watch all the pomp and circumstance with it. I don't really care. So yeah, I'm more of a meat and potatoes guy, and generally speaking, most of these things are big, spectacular shows with all the spectacle, and I don't need that.
That's right. And from a different perspective, I saw on Twitter a press writer said that the current form of things is really boring to her. The virtual event thing, it just does not capture her like the actual ebb and flow of going to a physical show, talking to individual developers about their games. That is something that meant a lot more to them than the current form of this. So that is all to say that none of this is perfect world stuff.
Yeah, and everybody's different, right? I mean, everybody's gonna have their own thing. I feel like I'm an outlier in the way I approach stuff. It's just the way I do it. But I can see why these shows are bigger and why I never really got into it.
Well, I also think that us thinking that there's not a bunch of people that feel the same way as you, Bumpy, is a huge mistake. I feel like it's been proven that these virtual shows do mean something to quite a few people, based on the fact that as a developer, we see this as a valuable thing to do because people will follow us and wishlist us and et cetera, the things that we need them to do. So it's obviously it's working for some people. Maybe it's not working for everyone and the people who speak up on Twitter all the time, but that's not everybody, we know. There are this society is sectional, and we have different folks that, like you just said, paddle different ways. So you just kind of have to take advantage of this. Is a common theme, I think, on this stream, is that you have to take advantage of opportunities as they are there in front of you as a developer. Opportunistic is definitely part of the game of being a good indie studio.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those. You're not gonna necessarily. I need to get into this one specific thing because it's perfect. It's gonna reach everybody. You have to be like, all right, maybe we're gonna go to a couple shows and be physically on the floor, and we talk and we meet people that way. Then we're gonna go and take part in a live event or a direct or a Steam Next Fest or whatever it is, and reach the people that are more online that can't afford to go to the shows, and just kind of throw us a bunch of kind of like pokers in the fire, but you're kind of throwing them out to see what sticks, essentially, just without
for indie developers in particular, like especially like anyone who knows they're not trying to compete on a marketing level with Ubisoft and Nintendo, et cetera, the virtual events do offer some more niched down opportunities to find players that are interested specifically in what you are making, versus even Next Fest is so broad, and they try to help categorize things so you can find kind of the games you're actually going to be invested in. But some of the virtual events of, like, there was a wholesome one the other day of, like, it gives players an opportunity to just follow the events where they're going to be interested in things. Whereas when I used to watch E3, I was sitting through a lot of racing games and whatever that I just did not care about, and I just wanted to see what else there was.
So I just shared a link to a Vice article that came out the last couple of days, with so many games being released. How do you get anyone to pay attention? And so it's a nice read. I didn't need it. We don't need to go over it in any detail, but I wanted to share it because there is one anecdote that is interesting to me and is exactly what I'm talking about when you have to be opportunistic as an indie studio. So one of these developers basically built up a lot of their clout and a lot of their, pre-release metrics and wish lists that we always talk about to get to a point where they could get on the front page of Steam, to get that exposure, to get into the top global sellers, and they've really taken off from there. They did that through submitting to a Taipei game festival that would normally never accept outside the country or the region submissions, but it turned into a virtual event because of COVID, and they did accept worldwide submissions. So this studio from, I don't know where they're from. I don't want to just say a random country because I can't remember where they're from, but they're not from that area or that region, and that's fine. That was totally allowed this year, right? And they submitted, and that from that exposure in just that region. Or that that event alone, it is an international event, so to speak. But a lot of folks in that region saw that. That was what catapulted them to having a successful release. So it's just things like that are in that article that points to how occasionally outside the box you have to think, in addition to a lot of the fundamentals that we always talk about that you need to be addressing and thinking about and making sure that you're putting into motion. So another link I'm going to share here. This is the Steam-related festivals that are virtual events that have gone on the last week. Right, so the last week essentially was when E3 was supposed to be. And instead we had a myriad of, individual sort of, I won't call them one-offs because they are annual festivals, a lot of these. So we'll see them again. Some of them are actually like not even annual. They're like twice or three times a year. I think biannual works potentially, but biannual works in two different ways. So I want to make sure I clarified. Multiple times a year. So some of them are bigger than others. From what I'm seeing in one of my inner circle emails with indie developers, if you were part of the PC gaming show, you saw about 10 times the amount of wish lists that some of us saw on other events. So that's interesting to note. It's not something that we're like, shoot. Because notably the PC gaming show did not have an open submission like a lot of these other ones did.
So like they had a curated list that they pulled from?
I believe through outreach and probably through publisher. Policy. I know that one, I can't name anybody, but one developer in particular had a publisher that had a PR firm or a PR within the publisher that reached out to PC Gaming Show and pitched the game and for the event. Or PC Gamer, I should say, and pitched it for the PC Gaming Show, and that's how they got in. Others probably got in through just invite. Yep, I definitely think that is the case. And ultimately, the developers who are talking about this in this inner circle kind of email are saying it's who you know in this kind of situation, and they admit that it's not like they're like it's nothing. It's like an unfortunate thing because it really is who you know and stuff. So it's a networking thing, and it's have you been mixing it up with the people that are involved in the organization and stuff.